Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest financial services webinars from CSI. And today, myself, I'm Client Director, Matthew Clemow at CSI. I'm joined with Jason Normanton, who's Head of Cloud Services. And we're going to be looking at the rapidly changing world of cyber and microarchitectures, and especially applying that to how that's affecting the financial services world, and actually where cloud is really playing a big part in terms of helping, you know, business, small financial services protect and innovate in that area. I'll pass over to Jason now.
Good morning, Matthew. Pleasure to be here. So we're looking at an agenda today that will talk about the changing world of security, application architectures, what that has specifically to do for financial services, and then some ideas around the benefits of cloud and why CSI, we believe, is the partner of choice within the financial services managed service and cloud arena. So I'm going back a little bit in time and really showing my age, but before my youth and right back to before in the 1920s, the biggest threat to banking security was really, you know, from your traditional bank robber. They did evolve from just flashlights and swag bags to, you know, the movies that we've all seen where they're toting now AK-47s or M16s, and really frightening everybody to the point where you hand over that money to them. And, you know, if it wasn't a bank, it would be a way of cash transportation that was being attacked. There's a recent picture here from the Troubles in South Africa, where one of the first targets was an armored car. So this is still going on to today. But obviously there have been moves within financial services to reduce this risk profile. And it got so bad that in the 1920s, the Americans formed the FBI specifically to target, you know, bank robbers. And in the UK, we also formed the Sweeney. So, you know, once again, this takes me back to my youth. And by 1956, the Sweeney had made their first 1,000 arrests per year. They're actually termed the Flying Squad, but they are specifically designed to attack organized crime. And to make sure that they catch the bad guys out there. And they were so popular that they spawned TV programs. The FBI in America, there have been multiple programs about them. But it was a really high profile attack directly at the criminal and enabling armed police with similar tactics to those criminals to be able to go out into the marketplace and capture them. And like I said, there were changes in behavior that reduced this threat vector. So, you know, there was a reduction in cash payrolls throughout the 80s and 90s, more electronic movement of cash. And where you did move physical cash, there was a lot more guards. As I've spoken about, there was targeted police forces, AKA the FBI and the Sweeney. And now we have the National Crime Agency who target these organized crime gangs. There was also technological innovation, so dyes and other methods of tracking cash in transit, you know, most recently GPS and telematics that tell you exactly where a van is, and you can see on a real-time screen if that van makes an unscheduled stop or you know, actually breaks down or stops for any period of time, and that way you can send people out to assist them. And there was a massive proliferation of CCTV, kind of like a little bit like closing the stable door once the horse is bolted, but at least you then had the people who had robbed you on video, and that could assist the police in trying to track them down. And there was a real move towards direct alarms to police station or third-party security services who would then notify the police. And things like vaults, which only opened after a preset delay. And then GPS tracking and encrypted radio communication, so that whilst those guys in the armored trucks are out, they're safe, nobody can eavesdrop on their communication. And once again, like I said, that you could track them. But once, you know, that whole trend again involved more physical security measures so even more guards, and that was the traditional way that things were de-risked. But the world, once again has changed. There's pretty much every computer on the planet is now connected to the internet in some form or other. So there's been a real proliferation of APT hacking groups, which is Asia Pacific threat groups. And a lot of these are state sponsored. There are other groups within Russia, like Fancy Bear or Crazy Bear, which are two state-sponsored Russian hacking groups. These guys have been responsible for ransomware attacks and cryptographic attacks right across the planet. And, there are other groups within central China, like APT-41. These guys tend not to be as good at covering their tracks. And, that's the reason why we have pictures on FBI bulletin boards saying that if these people ever set foot in American territories or anywhere that America has an extradition treaty with, they want them sending straight to America. So a real proliferation and a move from individuals sat in a bedroom, what you imagine would be your traditional script kiddie or hacker, through to these professional organizations that actually are military units within their own countries. Fancy Bear operate out of Moscow, Crazy Bear operate out of St. Petersburg. These guys with APT-41 operate outside Beijing. And then there's a big North Korean contingent as well that do a lot of hack activity. And if we look around the globe, we've got a map from Kaspersky. This shows you the level of infections, and it's pretty much the whole of the developed world have been under serious threat attack vectors from these hacking groups. But there is a twist in the tale. This actual map talks about the Equation Group, which is an NSA-sponsored hacking group. They're called the Equation Group because these guys are experts at hiding their trails by using extremely strong cryptography and direct access to technology through their links with American businesses. And this all came to a head a few years ago when they were hacked by Crazy Bear, who then released the NSA toolkit. This was around the time of Snowden, when he was making the analysis that the US government does on their own citizens and on European-based citizens relevant to the world. So you have really professional state-sponsored hack groups who develop very, very complex ways and mechanisms to get into any computer on the planet. And these are now released on the internet for anybody to download. Some of these elements have been patched, but there are still 0-day releases within this hack tool set. So the story here is, you've got to do everything you can to be able to protect your environment. But if somebody really wants to be in, they are going to breach your defenses 9 times out of 10. So the threats of today, they've advanced from the armed robber with his shotgun or his M16 to phishing attacks and social engineering being the main attack vector within most companies. This targets individuals who may not be fully security trained and gets them to give away credentials to an environment. Or there's ransomware attacks. That's where an encryption algorithm is placed across all of your data, and you have to pay Bitcoin to an account to be able to get that encryption algorithm back. Or you can break them, quite often by brute force attacks, but that takes a lot of compute power, which is outside the capabilities of your average company. And as I mentioned before, we have targeted hacking tools. There's a lack of visibility within a lot of companies into what's happening, and I'll talk about that later. And then you've got your standard things that have come around really from a greater interconnection within the modern world, which are things like badly configured cloud environments. I noticed again that there's been a major hack in the United States this morning, where a lot of personal data has been released. You'll start to see that coming through in the press. But that was around an AWS S3 bucket that had no permissions placed on it. These storage areas are configurable from the internet. So if you know the HTTP strings that lead to S3, you can make automated tools that just look for buckets that are open. And you have organizations doing that. The Sony hack was one very simple one to this. and it's still happening today. There's one just been released this morning. I mentioned state-sponsored hacking groups before, and then obviously there are disgruntled employees who leave an organization but still have access to service accounts or to passwords. And we're seeing attacks like this become more and more commonplace, because a lot of these system management tools, like SolarWinds, operate in an elevated security posture within a company. So if you can get hold of those security account details, or you can hack through a vulnerability within the software, then that gives you another in-route into the organization. And here's a slide that comes from one of our direct partners, IBM, who did an analysis. These prices are in dollars, but around the cost to the average business of a major data breach, and how that can be offset by using either full automation around security, partial automation, or if you have none. And as you can see here, if you have no security capability or view that is automated, you're looking at about $4.43 million to resolve your issue, compared to 2.88 if you provide and have a visibility into your environment. So we partner with Alert Logic here to get their expertise and their automation tools, so that everything we do around the cloud, we have visibility into. And that really comes around to the number of days that it takes a standard organization to actually spot that they've got a breach within their environment. When I worked for Gartner, we did a lot of research around about the time of the Deloitte hack, and we estimated that anything over 100 days, your infection would probably be so serious that you would need to rebuild that environment. And organizations like Maersk and like the European Parliament have been directly hacked in this way and had to rebuild entire environments, either from backup tape, or in the case of the European Parliament, where they really didn't know the extent of the hack that had gone on within their environment, they chose to build out new systems alongside the old ones within actually the Azure cloud. And then they migrated the users over to that new environment and did not take any data unless it had been thoroughly checked beforehand. You can see that the financial services industry actually does quite well here. It's 163 days. So they're the second best at spotting interventions within their environments, but that is still over that target of 99 days that is established as, you know, you need to seriously look at your environment if there's been a hacker in there for 99 days or longer, because they will leave back doors, they will open up new areas, they will change that environment. They might even put communication services in there that will talk directly out to them. So when you close your traditional firewalls, etc., the threat is still behind. And then if we look at the average number of days that organizations take to contain a breach once it's discovered, you can see once again financial services does really well at only 54 days to disinfect and clean that environment, or to begin rebuilding their capability. Healthcare suffers the worst, and that's over 100 days, which is outside the initial threat vector that we talk about, just to be able to cleanse that environment. So on the whole, even for the best organizations which are down here, if we look at detect and disinfect, you're looking at around about 200 days on average, which is 3/4 of a year almost. That is far too long for somebody to have unfettered access into your environment. And it's not just about security. We've seen major trends within application architectures that have moved from a traditional, what we call monolith, so those two or three tier applications, where you have a web tier, an application tier, and then a backend database service. And we're moving more towards a microservices based architecture, where each individual function of the platform is broken up into its own service. they have their own discovery capabilities, and they then have their own communication capabilities. So each one of the elements of the application, instead of working as one giant app, are now broken up into much smaller parts, which allows for much more agile methodologies. And there's a slide from my day at Gartner here. So in a Mode 1 environment, it's a lot more traditional. The application is a big application. It requires a lot of hardware to run it on. And when you want to scale it, you really need to scale up and out rather than scale horizontally. Now, you can do this via replication, which means you provide a unique environment for each customer, but it is this monolithic replication or this monolithic architecture that is in place, which means if you want to change any one of the components within this architecture, because they're all so tightly knitted together and part of one larger architecture, you have to test absolutely every function within the application to make sure that your code changes haven't broken anything that is either within the application or upstream or downstream. That increases the amount of time that it takes to be able to bring new functionality into a product. And this is where 95% of all financial services software is at this point. It's still monolithic architectures. Services are rather slow to come to market, and it takes a long time to be able to put out new versions. So you're very common with the 3-month, the 6-month, or the 12-month upgrade cadence, with perhaps patching taking place in between. But this puts a huge load onto the developers who are creating those services. So in a reach for agility and through containerization, new forms of development, companies like Netflix, like Google coming out with much more condensed application architectures. These monoliths have now been broken up into what we call microservices architectures, where each element has one function. So if there's a website, that would be one microservice architecture plane. A database would be its own unique microservice architecture. By putting APIs and standard mechanisms of communication in place between these microservices, you no longer need to test everything to make sure that you haven't broken other elements of the application. And these microservices can scale out rather than scale up. So in the cloud, if you run anything over about 12 cores, you're looking at expensive infrastructure. These microservices are designed to run on much lighter, smaller infrastructure platforms, and they run through containerization. So you might have 4 or 5 4-core machines hosting this platform, which provides you with resilience and capability, whereas over on the monolith side, you might need 16 or 24 cores just to be able to run the database component and the rest of the service. So reduced cost and greater agility is what Gartner term as a Mode 2 workload, which is a modern microservices architecture-based application. So how do ISVs, software vendors, or even internal companies who run and create their own software packages, how do they deal with that? Well, there are 5 traditional ways of doing it. So there's rehosting, which is where you pick up the platform and place it somewhere else. There's refactoring, which is where you look at the components within the application and perhaps port some of those to maybe cheaper operating systems. You know, we've seen a lot with open source software. That would be a form of refactoring where you move an application to open source components on a Linux platform. Or there's major re-architecture, where you actually look at the monolith and you break it down first into maybe as a service-oriented architecture before then moving to a microservices architecture. All 3 of these tend not to be the best use of an organization's finances, and they tend not to major reduce that overall hosting bill. What we're then seeing is where organizations really are moving to microservices type architectures, and this is happening with a lot of the financial services ISVs that we work with, where they actually have to rebuild. So they release a new version of a product that has reduced functionality, because the whole story is about getting a viable product to marketplace. So it probably doesn't have the same level of functionality as the monolith that it's replacing, but it allows them to discard that code and rebuild from the ground up with a microservices and containerized architecture in mind. And then from a consumer perspective, you have the standard replace. So we're all seeing multiple companies coming to the market with SaaS platforms where you pay for what you consume, and you actually pay the licensing fee, the hosting costs, and everything in one go. You know, Salesforce and lots of other well-known organizations have taken this model. So that's a point where you would replace one set of software for another. This, once again, can be time-consuming and expensive, depending on how heavily that application is built into your business processes and how heavily you use it. And it's not something to be approached simply, but it is an option that a lot of companies will move towards. And then specifically within the financial services world, and often around really big organizations that have a lot of SQL Server or a lot of IBM iPower capability, we're actually seeing what I like to term as reinforce. And reinforce is where you maintain the core application capability, but you add additional functionality to it, often in the form of microservices that provide you with new business lines or new ways of affecting that data, where you don't have to go back and break down the monolith and completely change it. You take feeds from the database instance, and then you can do things like, you know, you can provide COVID payment plans is one example that we've seen recently, where, you know, a customer can take a break from a loan payment via a COVID payment plan that they agree individually with the financial services organization. And that kind of functionality can be presented quite quickly, working with the existing platform and the existing capability. Quite often that's more about database integration than it is around actual product integration, but reinforcing that platform with new functionality is definitely a trend that we are starting to see. And the world of, you know, financial systems has also changed. You know, you guys will know this just as much as I do, but the one-stop shop monoliths are on their way out. They're losing market share. People want more nimble, more capable features. And when you used to take on a monolith, it maybe had 15 features. 5 of those, if you were lucky, would be absolutely core to your organization and would do exactly what you wanted. But the other 10, they might not be quite correct for your business model, or they might not work properly with your business processes, or there might be functionality that was in another partner's product, but you can't get it because you're tied to a different kind of organization. And the open banking framework is an ideal example of this, where a set of rules around communication protocols and around functionality have been placed on an open basis so that multiple companies can hook into it without having to pay patent fees and things like that. And that then allows organizations to be able to build their own ecosystems that suit you as a bank or as a financial institution, rather than suiting necessarily the software provider. Organizations that are building this kind of functionality really have a view on the future, and they often work with a lot smaller, innovative partners to be able to find next generation capabilities, whether that be for things like treasury systems or even blockchain introductions, or actual crypto trading or share trading. And a prime example of this is Revolut, who are now classed as the most profitable fintech within the marketplace. and their 31-year-old Russian founder, who only owns 20% of Revolut, is now a 7-time billionaire on paper. So 20% of that company is worth over 7 billion. And the cloud has been an enabler for all of these changes, you know, but you also have to change the way that you run your operations and your mindsets to meet the new world. So no longer just having guards at the entrance to your data center. And what I mean by that is strong firewall policies, you know, looking at packets as they come in and inspecting them and relying on existing strategies for spotting those kind of issues. If you actually look at your firewall log files, it is no longer acceptable. As we move out and we expand our networks out to public cloud, often via VPN tunnels across the internet or via express route connections, we really need to be doing real-time monitoring of those environments, using the benefits of AI and expertise to be able to spot those signs very easily. Here at CSI, we decided that we couldn't build a world-class capability around this internally. So we actually partnered with one of the leading providers, AlertLogic, to be able to provide that level of expertise. And then once that breach or that hack has been spotted, we then, as a specialist within corrective action, take the corrective action to be able to put that organization right. But that 24/7, 365 monitoring by real experts would just be far too expensive to build in-house. So we partner with a world-leading organization so that we provide a world-leading service around this. And, you know, there's a huge choice of software providers out there with pre-integrating solutions using open standard APIs, as I previously mentioned. And a lot of the traditional vendors are really failing to modernize or rebuild their software from the ground up. This involves delays or a lack of functionality in the new versions compared to those older versions. And there are lots of other partners out there who are more focused on growing their own business than providing you with the right level of security to secure those environments and make sure that your business is protected within the cloud world. And I think that's another identifier for CSI. We have very secure platforms, and I'll move on to that a little bit later and talk you through it. And it also gives us the agility to introduce new functionality, which is really what you as a customer are concerned about. You need to be able to feel confident that you are secure, and that then allows you to develop your business. So open APIs, you know, they simplify that integration. The switch of trying to do this yourself is complex and time consuming. We cater for customers who aren't necessarily literate in the new world, but we make the complex very simple, and we work in partnership with you to drive forward these changes. Smaller providers, which live within our ecosystem, they tend to be really innovative, and they are excellent partners if you have a unique business opportunity within your organization, or you want to develop some new fintech solutions. And we like to work with those at early stages, because that way we can influence the designs and make sure that they do meet the requirements of FCA, or if you're in the States, FedRAMP type certification policies. And once implemented, those capabilities give an immense opportunity for business. I mentioned Revolut previously. That was built on an open set of standards and bringing in capabilities from multiple providers. And once again, those forward-thinking partners are building their own ecosystems and services, and we are doing exactly the same. We're aligned with multiple ISVs, more traditional and more up and coming, and we feel that we are ideal to work as the glue within that kind of capability to be able to make sure that you get rock solid architectures and good managed service capabilities out of the other side. And when you do this, customer satisfaction goes through the roof. You know, people want to be able to look at their money at any time of day, and they want the flexibility to be able to pay people today via email, etc. But you also need to cater for your more traditional customers who might not have such tech savvy capabilities, or might not be able to access some of those new features. So why do we think that cloud hosting is the way forward? And really, we're talking hybrid cloud here. But we see the benefit of pay-as-you-go consumption and billing. Also, the flexibility that these kind of solutions can offer you. So if you do have periods where you have to do large batch job processing, or you have peaks within service, these systems can scale up and scale down, and you only pay for the bigger hardware footprint whilst you're actually using it and whilst it's bringing value to your business. Gone are the days of building systems on premise that are big enough to handle your absolute maximum peak. You know, that is just absolute craziness. And that, to be honest, was the reason why AWS originally got into the cloud business. They knew that on Black Friday and at other times of the year, they needed massive systems to handle the throughput. And then for the rest of the year, those systems were sitting 90% idle. So Jeff Bezos had the amazing idea of pulling a team together under Werner Vogels at AWS, and they started selling that capacity back out to the marketplace. And the profitability of AWS now far exceeds its parent company, Amazon, because it's a model that a lot of people understand and a lot of people have wanted to use. Microsoft luckily got into the game very early, and they provided a similar capability. And they really are now the two leading providers, with Google bringing up a close third. And within any of those platforms that I've just mentioned, security is built in from the ground up. These are billion-dollar businesses per year. And if there was wide hacks done against their platforms, that would give them all sorts of problems and people wouldn't use the systems. So from day one, they made sure that their design patterns and their systems had granular security that was built from the ground up. They then certified those platforms, ISO 27001, FRAMP, PCI DSS, and they've provided design patterns so that customers can leverage those capabilities. When you certify an environment, okay, it's just a piece of paper. But what hangs behind that is mature processes and mature management capabilities. And that's why CSI take certification so seriously. They go down to physical controls like role-based access control, making sure that the right people have the right jobs. Personally, I get around about 25 emails a week telling me of privilege escalation within CSI's own cloud environment. If I know that an administrator shouldn't be doing a job where he requires privilege escalation, I can challenge that person and I can see the log as to why they had privileged access management at that point. And then to protect those accounts, we've got multi-factor authentication. We've got granular permissions on everything, right down to storage and network packets. And if you use infrastructure as code, as we do here at CSI, you can make sure that any manual errors that could be introduced during the build process are eradicated. And there is a constant improvement process to always make those deployments and that code as good as it can possibly be. So I've talked a lot about agility, but I'm also a realist. I've worked in the financial services industry and for Gartner, for over 15 years. I see a lot of technical debt out there. It's probably the biggest single stopper for organizations to move forward. Dealing with decisions and actions from the past, recognizing when things have been built badly, and repaying that debt to make sure that it's improved in the future is absolutely key to many organizations being able to move into modern operations capabilities. ITIL needs to be modified. It's no longer about just keeping the lights on, keeping the system stable, keeping it patched. There's a level of agility now that customers and the market and your own employees expect around software that is fit for purpose, is modern, and can support the business. And that's what we mean by staying agile. And it's a journey. It's a journey that is different for every single customer. So here at CSI, we like to feel like we're your Sherpa. We give you advice on your specific journey, and we tailor that to your specific needs, bringing your entire team along so that they can climb to the summit of that mountain that is IT transformation and provide the business back with maximum agility, but in a secure, stable, and risk-free way. And you know, how do we do this? So the first bit is analysis around technical debt. We understand it. We can help you to track it. We can help you to repay the principal on that and advise you on the ways to move forward, either with new providers, with new functionality, or even where you develop that in-house with our own DevSecOps practices. We also have a completely new modern operations team. Here at CSI, we did not try to change the people that were in the existing business. We invested in a cloud team that was truly born in the cloud. There is a different way to manage architectures within the cloud that don't always fit, like I said, with those ITIL values and ITIL management. It's still important to have a good, stable grounding, but there are agility and capabilities and things like automation that we needed to build a brand new practice around. And that's why we have a dedicated public cloud practice that then leverages the technology capabilities of our private cloud practice to be able to provide a hybrid functionality. And we like to stay agile. We build, measure, and we learn, and then we improve. That constant improvement process, which came out of the ITIL background, you know, we've adapted to agile methodologies using things like blue-green deployments, using technologies like chaos engineering to look for faults within products. And from that, we found that safety comes in small batches. So that's where we're talking about microservices and the agility that they give you, because you're only changing one component, but you're rapidly getting new functionality to the business. Netflix, who I've mentioned previously, Google, AWS, all run their entire business on this model. It doesn't suit everybody. It takes quite a while to get there, but the capabilities and the new functionality that you can bring to market massively improves that. And we're now starting to see this within a lot of the, shall we say, more traditional banking environments. Lloyds Bank recently purchased a fintech company that specializes in agile delivery mechanisms. So they've bought that capability in as well to rapidly speed up their relevance in the marketplace and try and capture those customers. Interest rates are the lowest that they've ever been in history. So you're not making that same kind of money from savings. As we've moved into Brexit, often across territory, bank transfers are increasing in price. And you know, there's not the profit margin on doing international transfers anymore. So they've got to look at new ways of actually monetizing those environments and keeping their customers happy. And this is leading to the snap up of small, very niche fintech players who are now being brought directly into banks. And you'll see a release of new functionality that will come out from those banks. And you know, two-way doors. I mentioned RedBlue Technologies, which I'll talk about just for a second, but that's where you deploy the new functionality and repoint the old functionality. That allows you to quickly switch back if you notice a code issue, and that's the kind of methodology that Netflix and other companies use, where they release the new functionality after it's been unit tested, but then if they find a problem in production, they quickly switch back to the previous version of code, which doesn't contain those buggy features. They fix it, and then they go through a new deployment cycle. And we get lots of customers every week asking us, how do we do this? So we follow frameworks. The one that I've pointed out here is the Microsoft Azure Cloud Adoption Framework. We also have our policies that align with Gartner and align with AWS best practice. But this was probably the nicest slide that I could find on this, which explains the steps that we go through. We work with you around strategy and business outcomes, because without business outcomes, there is no IT. So we make sure that you are going to achieve what you're setting out to achieve at the board level. We then help you to plan what that movement would look like, build roadmaps. We then prepare your landing zones, which we have a proprietary piece of IP technology that introduces best practice, which we call FastTrack, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And then we help you either migrate those workloads or build those brand new workloads in the cloud. And then we've got governance so that we can take benchmarking and we can look at the status and the dynamic state of each system. And we check that on a daily basis to make sure that you remain compliant. And then we manage that environment for you if you want us to. We provide the scale and the operations that can enable you to stand on the back of these giants. And we obviously have to have a multi-partner sourcing strategy to be able to provide all of this capability. So we have our public cloud, we have our on-premise systems, we have our private cloud capabilities, and more recently, we've started to develop edge computing capabilities where we can put that same functionality that you have in the public cloud within your own data center and provide you with a private cloud that aligns directly to a public cloud. So the same code base, the same functions, the same capability, but they don't have the same number of services that are available within a public cloud. That has to be very clear. But if you are developing your own software, you can leverage, for example, AWS Lambda functionality by deploying AWS Edge services within your own data center. And we wrap all of that around with our security, our data protection, our automation, and our system management services. And if you have more than one public cloud that you're active within, we provide multi-cloud management tooling that gives you one common pane of glass to be able to manage and add to that environment, even if that environment is under our management. The world of cloud has democratized. There are no more, you can't touch those systems because we're managing them. We work in partnership with you to find the correct target operating model. And we underpin all this with our massive investment within Equinix. So Equinix provide private data centers that are often co-located right next door to the major public cloud providers. They have an Equinix Cloud Exchange, which is very much like ExpressRoute, which provides a direct fiber interconnect straight into these cloud platforms, usually running at least 16 gig a second, but they can be multi-owned, so you can get much greater capability than that. But real low latency connections where we place our private cloud or our IBM Power workloads that aren't necessarily suitable to go into Microsoft Azure or AWS or Google Cloud or IBM. And we then provide you with low latency, high speed links directly through. This allows us to be able to put your data right next to the cloud. So you can have data that is worked on in the cloud with the results being delivered back once to our Equinix data center so that you're not constantly incurring egress and ingress charges. You maintain data surety. You know that that data is held only within your own environment. It's encrypted at rest and in movement, but it provides you with the flexibility to be able to spin up resources or spin up functionality like Power BI within Microsoft's cloud, work on those numbers, and then deliver those results back to your business. And that gives you a major amount of flexibility that I haven't seen in any other provider. And this model was a Gartner cool offering in 2017, which is when CSI started the journey to building this capability out. So it's now very mature. We operate in over 7 global Equinix data centers in Asia Pacific, in Europe, and in North America, and we can provide you with that capability. And as you can see from some of the customers that we've got up here, this is very popular within the financial services marketplace, because we can put that granular control around your data and not expose it to additional risks. And how do we do this? Well, we use a concept called Scaffold and FastTrack. So Scaffold is an engagement where we come on site with you. We run workshops where we talk about the art of the possible, and we understand your business and your technology requirements. We then design a FastTrack capability with you that provides foundational landing zones, communication services, and any centralized services that you need. We put firewalls here so that we can monitor and log all of the traffic within this centralized foundation zone. And then from that, we take off additional zones that can provide you with a web landing zone, a DMZ so that you can put services out to the public safely, a file store landing zone. You might even have some Windows virtual desktop capabilities, but we wrap it all around within our FastTrack service, which is an 80-20 service. And what I mean by that is 80% of the code is pre-built, it's maintained like a software product, and it aligns completely with Gartner and Microsoft or AWS best practice as far as their blueprints go. And then the Scaffold collects the 20%, which is specific to your organization, your naming conventions, your IP addressing schema, how you're going to manage those systems, what native tool sets you're going to use, and it documents all of that. So we provide you back with an operations manual for that cloud provider that you've chosen. And on our side, we feed that data into our FastTrack solution, which deploys infrastructure as code out on the other side, which means that every single time we do the deployment, we end up with an environment that is best practice compliant and customized for you. We have this pen tested on a regular basis, and we constantly improve this code as we move forward, and we build in greater experience, or the cloud providers change their advice, which happens quite frequently, but we increment it as a software version, so we can always tell you which version we deployed for you originally. And if you want to upgrade to the latest version, we can then effect that change as well. And enable this transformation in as smooth and seamless way as possible, we've built several services. So for doing the fundamentals, the connectivity, the provisioning, and the implementation, and that initial delivery, we have our FastTrack service. We also have a cloud strategy assessment, which performs the first bit, which is around feasibility study, proof of concept, and review iteration, so that your business and your cloud strategy is very, very clear. Our FastTrack service, as I mentioned, lays the foundations for a successful consumption within the cloud. And then we have migration and wave planning services that take your existing workloads or introduce new workloads and build those out for you within your chosen provider. And then we also have our transition services, which can move that new functionality and new capability either into your operations group, or if you're taking a managed service from us, it will go through exactly the same process so that our managed service guys accept a robust solution that is fit for purpose. We've split these services up because we understand that every customer may be at a different point on this journey, and we can do each one of these individually, or we can tie it all together and provide a full migration service. You are the customer. It is your choice as to which elements we do, and we work closely with your teams to do knowledge transfer throughout the entire procedure of work. So I won't dwell on this too long. I kind of explained it previously, but if you're interested in our scaffold service, please get in touch. This is the flyer, and there's a brief explanation here. We will also provide this deck out as a PDF to everybody, and there will be a video of this introduction. And then we have our fast track service. So providing secure landing zones, best practice compliant, provides an initial Azure governance framework, removes lead time and complexity, stops people from making mistakes like misconfiguring storage arrays or storage services, and ensures a solid baseline for security and control moving forward. And then we can manage all of this through our flex support capability, which we have 3 levels of service: basic, standard, and advanced. Advanced is a fully managed service. Our basic service provides you with additional Microsoft support and is done at a very low cost. And then our standard service is halfway between the two. We don't provide architecture reviews, and we don't provide a DR service around the standard service as a standard element. That those come into play within our advanced service. But we have flyers, we have capabilities around that, and we're happy to have a call with you or to make you aware of those. So I'm coming towards the end now, and I'm conscious I've been talking for a long time here. Why would a financial services client work with CSI? So for me, it's around our experience. You know, we have a born in the cloud team. We are also experts in infrastructure and more traditional IBM iPower solutions. So we can really meld those capabilities together to give you a full view right across your portfolio. We help reduce the risk. You know, we've done this before, we've done it multiple times, but we are constantly learning. And any partner or provider who tells you that they're not constantly learning and constantly adjusting their capabilities, you should run away from. You know, this is a constantly evolving marketplace. Advice, best practice changes, but we align directly to organizations like CIS, FedRAMP to take their best practice, and then we apply that to the design patterns from the individual providers. We know who are the players within this market. We support many of them, and we provide managed services to many of them. So we can also assist when you're looking for, you know, your new version of software or your new functionality. But for me, one of the key elements is we learn, we educate, and we evaluate those new technologies in partnership with you, and then we help you to develop the operational models that suit your business. So if you don't want to outsource, we can help you with how you structure your organization to run this kind of thing. That is not a problem to us. You know, we are here to support you as the customer, and we work in partnership with you to take the pain out of your digital transformation journey. So we've got a few questions here. I think I'll hand over to you, Matthew, if you want to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first one is to say, a few questions have been sent in ahead of the time to get run through. We haven't got a huge amount of time, so if we can quickly run through these, Jason, that would be brilliant. What would you say a ballpark timescale migrating a cloud service would be? I think it might be predicated on some other elements of what the project would look like, but
yeah, no, absolutely, Matthew. I mean, every migration is different. You know, customers have different requirements. There are organizations who maybe need to exit a data center, or they're coming up against a really expensive upgrade. In that case, they will probably do a lift and shift, which isn't the most financially viable way of doing a cloud migration, but it's the quickest way. And that can take, you know, anything from a couple of weeks through to a few months, depending on the size of the environment. But it's the fastest way to get into the cloud, but it is also the most cost inefficient way of going into the cloud. You're basically picking up architectures that were designed for a private on-premises type architecture, and you're moving them to a cloud capability. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, once you get above around about 12 to 16 cores, especially around database services, which a lot of financial applications have, you're looking at a lot of expense. A customer of mine in a previous life had a 64-core SQL server that they only really needed for times when there was absolute peaks in their online business, and that cost them around about £17,000 per month to run. Obviously, that same level of hardware sat on a data center over a 3-year return on investment would have been a significantly cheaper element. That was more to do with the age of the software that they were actually using and the design patterns within that software, the modern agile cloud services, but they needed to run it in the cloud.
Yeah. Okay. The next question, thank you, Jason, is how easy is it for cloud services to be migrated from one cloud platform to another?
Okay, so there are ways that you can do this, but quite often it involves a level of conversion that is a one-way street. So if you wanted to pick up a VMware server in the simplest example and move that into AWS, unless you've got VMware running in AWS, which is an option, but it's expensive on licensing, you have to create that file when you move it. So you actually change the virtual machine as you put it into AWS. There is then no way to take that service back out of AWS and put it back onto VMware or put it directly into Microsoft Azure. Each of these hyperscaler cloud platforms runs an underlying hypervisor that is a limitation. And that's the reason why containers are seen as being the way forward, because containers only rely on a Linux kernel or a Windows kernel being present within the cloud that they are the target of. So if you containerize your application, you can very easily move it between cloud providers by just installing a host node within your relevant cloud provider. And we see that with some of the larger financial organizations where they're actually moving workloads based on cost between different cloud providers. But that's not an easy task, and it involves a lot of development cycles. And unless you own the code, being able to move to that microservices architecture is difficult. Yeah. As you go higher up the platform, so as you go to PaaS and as you go to FaaS, there is absolutely no migration capability whatsoever. If you want to move those kind of services, so platform as a service or function as a service, if they are native to a specific cloud provider, like AWS Lambda, you cannot write Azure functions that match AWS Lambda, and you cannot move that code directly. So there's an element of re-engineering and there's an element of platform lock-in when you move into direct platform or functions as a service. But they are the cheapest, most cost-effective method of running a workload in a cloud at this point in time.
Great. Maybe I'll have a go at the next one. To initially, you can
absolutely.
I mean, what other add-ons that CSI provide other than cloud providers might not? I think we've already touched on the Equinix partnership. It gives us a really great platform to provide, really high bandwidth, quick connectivity to multiple platforms and our own private platform. That's the first one. And effectively a 24/7 SOC. Which I think is going to be very important for financial services providers, moving forward and having that real responsive, full 24/7 understanding of what's going on in their environment. Another one is actually which is grown through our expertise probably over the last 15 years in financial services, is that we provide quite a very good audit support capability for all our financial services customers. So we, having 30 odd financial services customers, we are constantly working with them in terms of doing DR tests and providing audit support capabilities, and working with them and with the FCAs in terms of responding to questionnaires and their annual audits. And also from that, we have the expertise to go into organizations and do gap analysis on their operational robustness, their security posture, and provide remedial programs into getting them up to to what is the de facto FCA recommended architectures and operational robustness. I think that's quite a good one. I think the other one is that spending, myself working over the last 10 years within CSI, we now partner with a lot of financial services software companies, and so we help them in their go-to-market strategy. So we provide their first line support, their operational hosting capabilities, and security wraps. So what that means is we have a pre-baked go-to-market SaaS solution for a lot of these providers that we can go through to. So many of the organizations that come talk to, we already have these pre-baked hosting wraps that we can do for their services, which actually makes that we can remove that headache from their organization and provide an optimized, highly robust operational model for them.
Yeah, I think there is only one element I would touch to that, Matthew, and that was an excellent summary. The only other element is we have a proliferation of equipment and capabilities. So if an organization needs a short-term LPAR of IBM power, or they need some additional testing environment spinning up, maybe it's in Microsoft Azure, then we are experts at doing that by using infrastructure as code and having that power platform like our Power CSI Cloud. We can actually provide test environments without the customer having to go to the expense of procuring new hardware and dropping it into their environment when maybe they only want to test for a period of 3 to 6 months of every year. We can spin those environments up, allow the customer to test upgrades, do parallel upgrades of even major functionality, and then switch those across at the relevant time. So we provide access to platforms that typically would not be available within the public cloud providers, or capabilities that wouldn't be available directly from them.
And the last one, which actually I think is quite an interesting question in terms about can CSI security monitoring service be extended to include other cloud services? Because obviously now you've mentioned about systems are now becoming more fragmented because you've got different SaaS services, different platforms, but obviously what the organizations want to understand is that can you provide a single a pane of glass that in terms of user security and monitoring, is that available?
Yes, absolutely. So, with our extensive partnership, especially around SIEM with Alert Logic, we provide a single pane of glass environment into whatever your organizational has. So that could be on-premise, x86, Windows, Linux, IBM Power systems, or it could be born in the cloud services like functions as a service, or even platform as a service where you're running SQL Server in Microsoft Azure, or you're running AWS Redis with some S3 buckets. It's absolutely key that entire perimeter and everything inside it is monitored, and that is what our advanced SIEM services provide, and backed up by, as you said, our SOC service, which has experts in remediation available to act on any information that comes back to us from the experts at Alert Logic, who are there to monitor and watch for these kind of intrusions, attacks, misconfigurations, whatever it may be.
Great. No, thank you very much for that, Jason. I think this brings us to the end of today's webinar. I hope you've taken away some insights that we've been able to provide you today, and please feel free just to reach out to us or ask any questions that additional questions that this might promote with it through this hour, and we will follow up with an email with the presentation to yourself. So as I say, thank you very much for attending and watching, and look forward to seeing you next time.
And thank you for inviting me to present, Matthew.
Thank you, Jason. Much appreciated.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.